So here in 1.2, decisions and marginal cost and benefit, a couple of today's learning objectives are that we can define both utility and incentive, so two words that we're going to see in this lesson, and understand how people making decisions, how they base those decisions on incentives through something known as marginal analysis. We're also going to differentiate between something known as marginal benefit and marginal cost. We'll also see how marginal benefit decreases and also that marginal cost increases. And then finally, we're going to talk about why resources are being best used or being used most efficiently wherever we see that marginal benefit is equal to our marginal cost. So if you remember last time, we talked about economics and we said, what exactly is economics? And we said that economics is kind of the study of decision making, but it's that this idea of scarcity or that there's a limited amount of something that leads us to having to make decisions. So whether it's you trying to make decisions based on how you're going to use your time or how you use your money, or maybe it's looking at a society and society's having to decide how they're going to use their resources in the best way possible to satisfy people's wants and needs. And we also said that in this course, we had a couple different kind of key purposes. Now, we wanted to understand why we have to make decisions, how we make those decisions, and then what is the impact of our decisions. And we talked a little bit about that in 1.1, about the why we need to make decisions. But here in 1.2, we're going to talk about the how we make decisions. And I think the best way to do that is for us to take a look at a little bit of a scenario. Let's suppose that one day before school, you set your alarm in order to wake up at 6 a.m. because you have a test during first period and you wanted to get in a couple hours of studying before that test. So whenever your alarm goes off, you have a decision to make, right? We've all been there. We've all had to make that decision. We said, all right, should I just go ahead and hit the snooze button, right, and just keep on sleeping? Or should I get up and study? And so those are kind of your two big choices you have whenever your alarm does go off at 6 a.m. Now, is this an all or nothing decision? And I think that's kind of the first question we have to really attack, because we're looking at this and we're saying, okay, are our choices to either wake up at 6 a.m. or sleep all the way until 8 a.m. and just not study at all? Well, no, not at all. Like, we can split up our time. Like, we don't have to, sleep for another full 2 hours. We could maybe sleep just for another hour and then study for an hour, or maybe sleep for another 45 or 30 minutes get a little bit of extra study time in. But it's not an all or nothing decision. And I think that's a really important thing for us to understand about our decisions, is that whenever we make decisions, our decisions should be made incrementally, or what we also might call marginally. And that applies something here that we call the marginal principle. The marginal principle is this idea that decisions about quantity are best made incrementally. And what that means is we shouldn't look at our decisions as an all or nothing decision, but rather we should break those decisions down into a series of smaller decisions. So how do we see that play out here? Well, really, instead of asking ourselves, should I sleep until 8 a.m., we should be asking ourselves, hey, should I sleep for maybe just 15 more minutes, in some sort of increment? Now, we could get this increment all the way down to the second if we wanted. Should I sleep for one more second? Should I sleep for then another second? But obviously we're not getting down into that much detail, but you could go down to the minute. You could go down to every 2 minutes, every 5 minutes, whatever it might be. We're going to do it in an increments of 15, but that's still going to help make our decision easier. Now, how then do we decide if we should sleep for those 15 more minutes? And that's where we're going to apply one more principle here. And that principle is something that I think that you probably apply every single day. It's the cost-benefit principle. It's the idea that decisions are being shaped by incentives. We'll talk more about what incentives are here in a second, but really what that is, it's just that we got to weigh the costs versus the benefits of that decision. And so in economics, just as in like our daily life, we really assume that people respond to incentives. And an incentive is just a reward or a punishment for a certain behavior, right? Sometimes a certain behavior, there's positive incentives. And so what that means is something good comes from it, right? Maybe that if you show up you show up to work on time, you get to keep your job, right? That's a positive incentive. Maybe you can look at it the other way. If you show up late to your job, you could get fired. That's a punishment. That's a negative incentive. And you respond to those either way. And so therefore, when it comes to sleeping, when it comes to studying, we've got to respond to these incentives. We've got to say, hey, we got to look at the benefits of more sleep versus the costs of then studying less if we're going to sleep more, right? Because there's a trade-off between our decisions. If we're going to sleep more, that means we're going to study less. And so then we take those principles and we're going to apply those principles together. We're going to apply the cost benefit principle right alongside the marginal principle as we weigh our decision. And so we have marginal cost and marginal benefit because, like we said, we need to weigh the cost versus the benefit, but we also need to do it marginally, or what we have to do in increments. So marginal cost, when we see that word, what marginal cost means, it's just the additional cost from consuming one more of a good or service. Or in this case, when we're talking incrementally, we're saying for one more 15-minute period of sleep, how much more is that going to cost us? Just that additional 15 minutes. We're thinking marginally here. Now, at the same time, we're also thinking of the benefit that comes from that. Marginal benefit is the additional benefit we get from consuming one more of a good or service. And so what that means is when you just look at the next 15 minutes, what is the additional benefit you get from sleeping for those additional 15 minutes? Now, one of the things that's a little tough here in economics is trying to quantify the costs and the benefits, right? Because how do you quantify the benefit of more sleep, right? You can say, well, I'm not as tired. Or maybe it's maybe a little easier to quantify the cost of less studying. Maybe you quantify that by the amount of points you might lose on your test. But we need to do this in a way where we can compare the two. And so in economics, what we do is we use this term known as utility. Utility is just kind of this common measuring stick that we can use in order to measure the amount of benefit, happiness, satisfaction, or something that is being provided by consuming a good or service. Or utility can also be measured as a cost, right? As losing utility or losing benefit. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of this marginal analysis and what this might look like. So we're going to do these values in utility. And remember, utility, just this measurement of satisfaction or happiness. And so let's first start with the marginal benefit or the additional benefit. When we decide, as we wake up and, see the alarm clock, it says 6 a.m. and we think about hitting our snooze button, right? And so let's say the first time we hit the snooze button, it'll add 15 more minutes to our alarm clock. And so that first decision really is, should I sleep 15 more minutes? Now, that means we're going to sleep until 6:15 a.m. Now, we all know right when you wake up and you're super, super groggy, that extra little bit of sleep, that's an awesome bit of sleep, right? We really benefit that sleep. And, maybe you had other things going on, so you're up later. And so any little bit of extra amount of sleep is going to be beneficial to you. And so let's say that we value that first 15 minutes at 100. We call those utils, which is a measurement of utility. So we measure at 100 utils, right? Now, let's say your alarm goes back off at 6:15 and you got to make the decision, am I hitting the snooze alarm again, right? So should I sleep 15 more minutes? Now this time I'm going to be sleeping from 6:15 until 6:30. Well, while that additional sleep is beneficial, it's not quite as good as that first 15 minutes, right? That first 15 minutes when we were super groggy, really hard to get up, that was super valuable sleep. And now that we've gotten a little bit more sleep, we might not value additional sleep as much. And so maybe this next 15 minutes, we only value it at 75 utils, right? Well, let's say we, set our snooze button at 6:30 again for 15 more to sleep until 6:45. Now, by this point, by 6:30, you've already gotten an extra 30 minutes of sleep. So you're already doing better with your sleep. You probably won't get as much benefit again from this additional 15 minutes. Not as much as the 15 minutes prior, nor the one prior to that. So maybe you only value this one at 50 utils. And then again, for the next 15, let's say trying to sleep from 6:45 till 7. Well, at this point, you're inching closer and closer to that time. You would have just woken up anyway. So you really don't value that additional sleep all that much. And then finally, maybe you're asking yourself, hey, it's 7 a.m. Say you slept all the way that much more. You've gotten an extra hour of sleep. Should I sleep for another 15 more? Well, you might not even get any additional benefit from that. Maybe, the times when you sleep too much and you're overtired, or maybe you just can't fall back to sleep. That's what we're looking at there, right? There's no additional benefit from setting your alarm for that 15 more minutes. Now, if you notice, that marginal benefit is going down each additional time. And we refer to this as something known as decreasing marginal benefit. It's the idea that our additional benefit decreases for each additional unit of something we consume. And we can see that all over. Like, you can take a look at it, like, say, like, you wake up and you decide to have a donut for breakfast, right? That first donut is delicious. It's awesome. It tastes so good. And then you look back at the box after eating the first one. You're like, should I eat a second? Well, that second one isn't as valuable. It's not going to taste as good. You're already kind of a little bit full. You don't really need a second donut. So it's not going to provide you as much benefit as the first. And we see this all over the place, right? That the idea of decreasing marginal benefit, that for each additional unit of an item we consume, we receive less and less benefit than the previous one. So let's take a look at our other column, because when we talk about this sleep, obviously we said the trade-off here was that if we're sleeping more, we're studying less. And so this is where marginal cost plays in. So again, if we set our alarm for 15 more minutes and said at 6 a.m. we're going to set our snooze alarm, we're going to wake up at 6:15, we have what we call, again, the marginal cost. And when we see the marginal cost, we say our marginal cost here is going to be the additional cost that comes from sleeping for 15 more minutes. The cost here is the studying that we have to give up, right? Because that's 15 less minutes that we're going to be able to study. So when we look here, we say, all right, how about if I lose 15 minutes of studying, what's the cost there? Well, maybe you look at it and you're like, if you think about 2 hours of studying as a whole, it's like, well, the last 15 minutes of studying, I really wouldn't have probably gotten a whole lot out of it anyway. I've already looked over all the main concepts. At that rate, you're kind of getting tired of looking at the material. And so giving up just 15 minutes of studying, you're not really going to lose out on that much. There's probably not much you would have learned in that last 15 minutes that you wouldn't have figured out in your other time studying. And so let's say the marginal cost there is 0. Now, 6:15 rolls around, you decide to hit your alarm for 15 more minutes. At that point, what's going to happen to the marginal cost here? Well, at this rate, that's a little bit less studying, and maybe you didn't get through all of your notes. Maybe there was a little bit of something at the end there that you didn't have time for, that you're like, oh, maybe it won't show up on the test, but maybe it will. I don't know. So you just kind of push it to the side, and but that's a little bit more less studying that you're going to be able to do. And so maybe the cost here is a little bit more. And maybe we say that the marginal cost is going to be 25 utils because there's that section in your notes you now didn't get to in time. Now again, 15 more minutes going from 6:30 until 6:45, that's even less studying that you get to do. And now maybe there's really a full lesson that of your notes you didn't get to go over. And so maybe that's an even greater cost that you're going to incur because there's a lot more material now that you didn't get to study that's going to show up on the test. And that's really going to cost you when you take the test. We can say the same thing for sleeping from 6:45 until 7. It's even more that you're going to lose out on there. And same thing, sleeping from 7 o'clock to 7:15. Maybe that's really like, hey, you're barely getting any studying. You're only getting 45 minutes of studying. And now if you sleep from 7 until 7:15, there's a lot that you could have been cramming into that 15 minutes. And so the cost is even greater. And so this displays this idea here of increasing marginal cost, that our cost is going to increase for each additional unit we consume, right? And we can see this on display here with our study time. Now, how do we then compare marginal benefit versus marginal cost? Well, at any point when we're making a decision and we're weighing the additional benefit versus the additional cost, if we see that the additional or marginal benefit is greater than or equal to the marginal cost, we're going to keep going. We're going to keep doing that thing because the benefit exceeds the cost, right? We get more out of it than what it's going to cost us. It's like walking into a store and you see a shirt. And maybe you say, hey, that shirt's really cool. I would pay like up to $40 for that shirt. But then you check the price tag, it's only $20, right? The benefit that you're going to receive, you value that shirt at $40, but you actually only have to pay $20. That means you're going to buy that shirt, right? Now, if we get to the point though, wherever we see that the additional benefit is less than the additional cost, we need to stop. Because at that rate, what we end up seeing is that the benefit we're going to receive is less than what we're putting into it, less than the cost. And it's like, what's the point then, right? We're giving up more than we're going to end up getting out of it. I think kind of an easy way to maybe visualize this is through a flow chart. So when we think about that question of how much should I sleep, right? Whenever you set your alarm, 6 a.m., Really, what we need to do, though, is apply that marginal principle and say, hey, should I sleep for a marginal amount or an additional amount? Should I sleep for 15 more minutes, right? And then we play that cost-benefit game. We measure using that cost-benefit principle, and we say, all right, well, is the marginal benefit greater than or equal to the marginal cost? And we said if the marginal benefit is greater than or equal to the marginal cost, then we're going to keep doing it. We're going to say, yeah, sleep for 15 more minutes. And then once we get to the end of that 15 more minutes, we need to ask ourselves the question again. Should I sleep for 15 more minutes? If the marginal benefit is still greater than the marginal cost, yes, keep going. And we keep repeating that. Now, if we get to the point, though, where we ask ourselves that question again in that cycle of is marginal benefit greater than or equal to marginal cost, and we have to say no, it's time to get up, right? Because at that point, the benefit we see from sleeping is less than what it's going to cost us in terms of our studying. And so let's take a look at our chart and kind of weigh this out then. Let's take a look at this first one. If that's extra sleep from 6 a.m. to 6:15, the marginal benefit is greater than the marginal cost. So should we sleep for that additional 15 minutes? Absolutely. Yep. So we keep on sleeping. How about whenever our alarm wakes us up again at 6:15? Well, 75 is greater than 25. The additional benefit we receive is greater than the additional cost. So we're going to keep on sleeping. Now let's say it's 6:30 and we're weighing if we should sleep until 6:45. Well, if we notice here, the benefit is equal to the cost, so it's kind of a wash here, but we're already sleeping, and so we see that if the marginal benefit is greater than or equal to marginal cost, we're going to keep going. So yep, we're going to keep on sleeping. Now at 6:45, we wake up and we say, should I sleep for 15 more minutes? And if we notice, the cost is exceeding the benefit. The additional cost for that additional 15 minutes is greater than the additional benefit we're going to receive. And so therefore, we need to wake up. We're not going to do that. We're not going to do the next one either. Those are not worth it to us. And therefore, we can see that by comparing the marginal benefit to the marginal cost, we can figure out that the right time or the best time that we would value our time is by sleeping until 6:45 a.m. Now, obviously, this is different for everyone. Different people might weigh the benefit they receive from sleep differently. They might weigh the cost of less studying differently. And so this varies from person to person. This is not an exact science. It varies based on person to person. It varies person to person based on the day as well, right? Might be a day that you already you got to bed really early, so you might really not value a lot of sleep. Or maybe it's a topic that you already understand a lot about, and so you don't need to study all that much. And so this varies. This is just specific to this situation, but we can always use these principles of the marginal benefit versus the marginal cost when trying to understand how we should make decisions. We can also look at this graphically, right? So if we were to take those points and plot them out. So let's say we plot our utility here on our y-axis, 25, 50, 75, 100, and we put the quantity of 15-minute increments down here on our x-axis. We can graphically look at this as well. And so let's say asking ourselves about that first 15 minutes, we determined that the benefit was up here at 100. The cost was down here at 0. When we talked about that second one, the additional benefit was 75. The additional cost was 25. When we added that third one, we saw they were both here at 50. A fourth 15-minute increment, sleeping from 6:45 until 7. The benefit was a lot less. It was only 25, but the cost was much higher. It was 75. And then we can also plot those last points out where we got no benefit for that last 15 minutes, but it was going to cost us quite a bit. Now, you might already see this, but we could connect these dots and have a marginal benefit curve and a marginal cost curve. And then this kind of helps us to understand it a little bit more graphically, especially when we consider what's happening on this graph. So if we look off here to the left on this graph, if we see this, any area in this green shaded area, we notice that our marginal benefit is greater than our marginal cost. And we know that because that green line sits higher than the red line over there. And therefore, at any of those points, it's more beneficial to keep sleeping, right? Sleeping is more beneficial than studying, so you should keep sleeping. It's not up until that point at 6:45 where we see that the cost and the benefit are equal to each other. Now, once we get to the other side of that, in that red shaded area, we see that our marginal benefit is less than our marginal cost. Therefore, the cost of sleeping is greater than the benefit you get from sleeping. So you need to wake up. You should have woken up a long time ago at any of those points along there, because if you see the red line sits higher than the green line, or the marginal cost is greater than the marginal benefit. And so all the way up until that 6:45 point, we're getting more getting more benefit from more sleep than we are from studying. Even if we were to break this down incrementally to the minute, we could look at like, okay, should I sleep from 6:40, sleep till 6:44, right? Well, it's the additional benefit would probably be right there around 51. The additional cost is right around 49. Well, guess what? 51 is still greater than 49. And so it's still worth it to keep sleeping, right? We could break that down incrementally all the way up until 6:45. It's worth it to us. Now, once we get beyond that, let's say the extra minute from 6:45 until 6:46, right? Well, that extra minute, the benefit now is still going down. So maybe that additional benefit is just 49, but the additional cost is 51 utils, right? Because you can see that the red line sits higher than the green line. Even though it's only a distance of 2, it's still not worth it. So we need to wake up at 6:45, because even sleeping till 6:46, that extra minute, we end up seeing that even for that extra minute, that the cost is greater than the benefit. So, we did that little flow chart of our marginal analysis with the sleep, but we can apply that anywhere we look, right? Like if you just are considering how much of something you should have, you can apply that marginal principle and just say, should I have one more? Whether it's a donut, whether it's, playing another game on a video game or something like that, whatever it might be. And the way the cost benefit principle is, the benefit greater than the cost, is the additional benefit greater than the additional cost. And if yes, you keep going, right? And then you repeat the process. Should I have one more? Is marginal benefit greater than marginal cost? If yes, keep going, right? But once we hit that no, we got to stop, right? Because at that point, we end up seeing that whenever the marginal cost exceeds the marginal benefit, it's no longer worth it, and we're actually losing out. So now we keep talking about this idea of cost, but what exactly do we mean by cost? Because I think about sleep, and sleep doesn't cost you anything. It's free. And I think we kind of saw this principle at play. It's this principle known as Tinstoffel, right? There's no such thing as a free lunch. Well, what exactly does that mean? I've had a free lunch before. Well, the idea of there's no such thing as a free lunch means that even if there's no monetary cost for something, every decision that we make does have a cost, right? And it's because that cost is that you could have been doing something else. It's your next best option. Like you came to school, and instead of being at school, you could have been working. Well, you gave up work, right? Work was your next best option. You had to give up going to work. Or in the case of sleep versus studying, right? If you keep sleeping, you have to give up studying. You can't be studying, right? And so what we end up seeing for, that example, the true cost of sleep was, really it was points on your test, right? With each additional 15 minutes of sleep, you were technically paying for that sleep with points on your test, where it's like, hey, more sleep means lower test score, right? And so that's one of these key things. As we talk about the idea that scarcity leads to decisions, we have to understand that decisions have consequences. There's impacts of our decisions. And kind of at like a very basic level, we talk about this as being known as opportunity cost. And so what exactly is opportunity cost? Well, opportunity cost is this idea that whenever we make decisions, we got to make sacrifices, or we have to give something else up. And opportunity cost is a cost. It just so happens that that cost is an opportunity. Opportunity cost is the value of our next best alternative, or it's what we have to give up when we make a certain decision. When you decide to sleep 15 more minutes, you were giving up 15 minutes of studying, and therefore you were probably giving up some points on your test. That's the value of your next best alternative. And so therefore, even though sleep is free, even though it costs nothing for you to lay in bed and get a few extra minutes of shut-eye, it does cost you something. It costs you what you have to give up. And that's going to be the focus of section 1.3.